I have always been drawn to the stories that make you check the locks twice. The ones told in hushed tones around late-night fires, or found in creased journals detailing encounters that defy all logic. From whispering ghosts in abandoned hallways to shadowy encounters in quiet woods. These are the tales of terrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our vision. So turn the lights down low and get ready to confront what goes bump in the night. You're listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind. Hello, and welcome in, my little horror fiends, to episode 4 of Don't Whistle to the Wind. On this episode, I have 7 stories about games you should never play. And I, myself, have only played 2 of these games. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Our first story is called Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. Emily, Maya, and Chloe decided to have a sleepover one night at Maya's house. It started off with snacks, gossiping, talking about boys and drama at school, etc., until the night had waned and it was nearly 2 a.m. Maya, noticing how quiet it was now, looked around her room, seeing the boredom creeping in on the other girls' faces, and had an idea. She piped up, asking if they wanted to play a game called Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. The other girls eagerly agreed, and they turned the lights off and lit a candle to set the ambience in the room. Emily volunteered first to lay still on the carpet. Maya and Chloe knelt beside her, placing 2 fingers of each hand beneath her shoulders and thighs on each side, and started chanting. Light as a feather, stiff as a board, they whispered in rhythmic unison. They closed their eyes, focusing on the chant. On the 4th repetition, a sudden, unnatural chill swept through the room, extinguishing the candle. The air grew thick and heavy. Light as a feather, stiff as a board. Maya and Chloe felt their fingers grow impossibly light. Emily's body had lifted. She was floating a full 3 feet above the floor, drifting in the pitch-black room. Panic spiked in Maya's chest, but before she could break the chant, a terrifying realization struck them both. The weight of Emily's body wasn't resting on their fingertips anymore. Something else was holding her up. Light as a feather, stiff as a board. A cold, raspy voice hissed from the shadows behind them. The room plunged into silence. The levitation stopped instantly, but Emily didn't drop. She hung suspended in the air, her back arched unnaturally. A low, rhythmic tapping echoed from beneath the floorboards, matching the cadence of their chant. The girls flipped the lights back on, terrified of what they were seeing. Emily opened her eyes, but they weren't her usual brown. They were completely pitch black, reflecting nothing but a void, and a cruel, unnatural smile had spread across her face. "You invited us in," Emily whispered, her voice layered with a chorus of disembodied whispers. Suddenly, the floorboards violently splintered inward beneath where Emily hovered, as she began to lift higher off the ground. Maya and Chloe screamed, lunging to grab Emily's wrist. With a final, desperate heave, they managed to pull their friend back to the safety of the carpet. Emily gasped, her eyes rolling back to normal with a horrified look on her face. "What happened?" she yelled. After Maya and Chloe explained frantically, all 3 of them started crying and embraced in a tight hug, vowing to never speak the words again. But even now, in the quiet of the night, they can still hear the rhythmic tapping from beneath the floorboards, reminding them that some games invite things that never truly leave. I have had my own experience with this game, and I kind of go back and forth whether telling people to play it or to not play it. And the reason being is because, just like the girls in this story, I had a sleepover where we played this game. And I was the person that was laying on the floor while 4 other girls were lifting me up, so to say. And it was a cool experience in the way that it really did make you feel like you were levitating above the floor. It's crazy what you can make the mind believe, right? However, after we got done playing that, several of the girls reported during the night that they heard things whispering to them directly in their ears. I don't know if it was the exact chant of light as a feather, stiff as a board, but they will still claim it to this day. So if you play this game, it is a fun game. I won't lie there. But also, you need to be wary that you might invite something in. It's not a guarantee, but there always is a chance. Now, our second story is probably one you've heard a lot about, and it's called Bloody Mary. You should never play Bloody Mary because her reflection is a permanent anchor. Once she shatters the mirror barrier, she traces your face in the dark, ultimately replacing your reflection with her own and trapping your soul behind the glass forever. The legend is a trap, a centuries-old snare for the curious. It happened to Becca in a quiet, shadowy bathroom, illuminated by the dim glow of a single candle. She whispered the name 13 times, her breath fogging the cold glass. The bathroom plunged into an unnatural, freezing silence. A pale hand twisted with jagged, blackened nails pressed against the mirror from the inside. Mary's gaunt, bleeding face emerged through the silvered surface. She grabbed Becca's shoulders and pulled, dragging her, screaming, into the suffocating dark. By the time her mother burst into the room, the real Becca was gone, but her captor wasn't. As Becca screamed, hands pressed against the glass, pounding helplessly at the frame, she watched the real Bloody Mary, now wearing Becca's face, wickedly smile back at her. As someone who is extremely superstitious and very engrossed into the paranormal society, I highly, highly advise against playing this game. The reason being is because there are, I want to say, myths and legends surrounding mirrors and how they are essentially portals. A few instances like you should never have a mirror pointing towards your bed, and if you do, you should cover it up with a blanket. The reason being is because some people claim to have out-of-body experiences where their soul, whatever you want to call it, sees themselves in the mirror, and when they try to come back to their body, they are in a sleep paralysis, unable to move, and end up seeing dark figures out of the corner of their vision. There's another superstition that people will lock their mirrors because they believe that spirits can come through them, no matter what. And lastly, I hope you never ever place your mirrors facing each other, as the superstition that comes with that is it creates portals between the two. But I do encourage you, the next time you look at yourself in the mirror, look really, really close and see if you can catch your reflection erroring in the way it looks back at you. Our third story is called Red Door, Yellow Door. It all started as a spooky ghost hunting trip to a supposedly haunted, abandoned school. Lauren and Adrian were looking for some kind of fright, something scary, something to get their adrenaline going. And after some small jump scares here and there, nothing else seemed to occur as the hours ticked on while they continued to explore. It was Adrian's idea to go into one of the classrooms and ask Lauren to play Red Door, Yellow Door, a scary game she had saw someone else play on a YouTube video. Both girls, still looking for a thrill, agreed that this game seemed like it would give them just that. Lauren wanted to go first. The floor cold beneath her fingertips as she laid her head in Adrian's lap, arms straight up. Adrian began massaging Lauren's temples while chanting the rhyme into her ear. Red door, yellow door, or any other color door. Suddenly, Lauren's arms dropped as her eyelids fluttered. She felt a heavy, suffocating pull of the trance. The darkness of the classroom dissolved into an endless hallway. The walls were blinding white, and the air had a familiar smell that she couldn't quite place. But she knew she had crossed the threshold when she looked down at her hands and realized they were translucent. The game had officially begun. The rules were simple. Seek out the positive light doors, avoid the dark ones, avoid clocks, run from anyone wearing a suit, go up if stairs are found, and never interact with any entities or people you encounter. Lauren began to walk, pushing past doors that didn't matter. As she wandered, the hallway shifted. The vibrant and colorful doors she sought after vanished, replaced by an endless row of identical, heavy, black doors. She tried to open one. It resisted. From the other side, she heard a faint scratching. It wasn't a friendly noise. It was frantic, desperate, like something was trying to claw its way out into the hallway. Panic flared in her chest. She needed to wake up. She needed Adrian to shake her awake, to pull her back to the real world. She turned to run back the way she came, but the hallway stretched infinitely in both directions. The white walls began to bleed a deep velvety black, and the temperature plummeted. A shadow peeled itself away from the far wall. It didn't have a face, only a pair of hollow, glowing eyes that radiated pure malice. This was the entity the game warned her about, a spirit trapped in the subconscious, looking for a host. Lauren tried to scream, but in the trance her voice was just a whisper. The entity glided toward her with a terrifying speed. It reached out with long, spindly fingers, grasping at her ethereal form. The touch burned like freezing ice, ripping at her very sanity. "Wake up," she pleaded with her mind. "Adrian, wake me up." Back in the classroom, Adrian watched Lauren's body go rigid. Her eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites. Panicked, she began to shake her by the shoulders, calling her name, but Lauren wouldn't wake up. In the trance, Lauren ducked into a random door, slamming it shut behind her. It was a dark, cramped room with no windows. The entity pounded against the door, its laughter echoing from the other side. Lauren slumped against the door, trapping herself inside. She had followed the whispers of the game too deep, broke the rules, opened a door she shouldn't have, and now the door was locked from the outside, forever trapping her. Lauren, in the physical world, never woke up. She was alive in the sense that her lungs were still breathing, and she had a pulse. But Adrian had started panicking even more so and called 911. Lauren was transported to the nearest hospital and was put on machines to help keep her alive while doctors continued to run tests. However, one evening, while Adrian sat next to her bed holding her hand, Lauren squeezed her hand back. Startled, she jumped off the chair, knocking it over, and stared in confusion as Lauren started to sit up and rip off all the devices hooked up to her. Adrian tried to hit the emergency call button, but it wasn't working, and she watched in pure terror as Lauren got up from the bed and stared at her with large black eyes. Adrian braced as Lauren walked towards her, trying to think about how she was going to defend herself against whatever this was piloting Lauren's body. But all it did was push past her and walk out the door, leaving Adrian in disbelief. Despite all efforts made by Adrian, other friends, and family, Lauren still hasn't been found to this day. I personally will never play this game. There's something extremely horrifying about getting trapped in your subconscious that deep and never being able to wake back up again. I would discourage anyone from playing these games, but again, I can't tell you what to do. But just understand, when you go deep, that deep into your subconscious, you might bring things back that shouldn't be able to come back. Our fourth story is called The Midnight Man. The scratching of the needle against my index finger was the loudest sound in my darkened kitchen, right up until the clock chimed 11:55 p.m. I squeezed out a heavy droplet of blood watching it hit the paper. My full name, Leo Thomas Vance, was already written there in jagged cursive. I placed the blood-soaked parchment on the floor directly in front of my front door, resting a thick white candle right on top of it. My hands shook as I struck a match to light the wick. I had read the Midnight Man game creepypasta rules dozens of times and couldn't help but laugh at the warnings. But now, standing in total blackness with only a flickering flame between my fingers, it didn't feel funny at all. Part 1 of the game was called The Summoning. I turned off the last remaining light in my living room, casting the house into absolute darkness. I stood before the front door and lifted my fist. Knock, knock, knock. I counted fiercely in my head. I needed to hit exactly 22 knocks, and the final strike had to land precisely at midnight. 19, 20, 21. On the 22nd knock, the grandfather clock in the living room began its heavy midnight toll. I twisted the doorknob, threw the front door open to the empty, freezing night air, and blew out my candle. The invitation was sent to the Midnight Man, and according to the creepypasta, he was now in my house. I slammed the door shut, frantically striking another match to relight my candle. The flame caught just as the 10th second ticked by. The game had begun. I gripped my box of matches, had my pouch of salt in my left pocket ready for when I needed it, and kept my eyes locked on the moving shadows. 12:45 a.m. The golden rule of the game was simple: keep moving. I paced slowly through the living room, down the long corridor, and into the kitchen, the candle throwing grotesque, leaping shapes against the drywall. It happened when I entered the dining room. The air turned freezing almost instantly, and an unnatural frost sinking into my skin. My breath plumed into thick white clouds in front of my face. Then came the whisper. It didn't come from behind me or beside me. It felt like it crawled directly out from inside my own ear canal. A raspy, dry clicking sound that formed no words, just malicious intent. I spun around, stepping backward out of the dining room as fast as I could without tripping. Out of the corner of my eye, a shadow in the corner detached itself from the wall. It was a tall, fluid, humanoid shape of pure black. I panicked, my hand trembling so hard that the candle wavered and went out. 1:12 a.m. The 10-second rule. Total blackness enveloped me. I had 10 seconds to get my candle relit. 1. I reached into my pocket for the matches. 2. My fingers clumsily kept slipping when I tried to grab the box. 3. I heard heavy footsteps dragging across the hardwood floor right toward me. 4. I finally got the box out, pulled out a match, striking it against the box. It snapped in half. 5. The footsteps were right in front of me now, the air thick, heavy, and freezing cold. 6. I struck a second match. It sputtered, caught, and I threw the flame to the candle wick. The yellow glow flared to life, illuminating the space just inches from my face. There was nothing there, but the air remained freezing, and I knew he was watching me, waiting for me to falter again. 2:58 a.m. By nearly 3 a.m., exhaustion had set in. My legs ached from pacing, and my eyes burned from staring into the dark shadows. I walked into the basement hallway, a place I already hated and feared. Suddenly, my candle glinted off of something wet on the floor. I looked down. The floorboards were covered in dark, viscous blood. I looked up and my chest seized with absolute terror. Hanging from the ceiling beams were my mother and my little sister, their eyes wide, glassy, and lifeless, staring directly down at me. He makes you hallucinate your worst fears. The rule flashed in my mind like a lifeline. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the sight was so violently distressing that I gasped, dropping the candle entirely. It hit the bloody floorboards and extinguished instantly. I didn't try to find matches this time. The terror was too paralyzing. Instead, I dropped to my knees, ripped open my pouch of salt, and frantically poured it in a jagged circle around my body. I curled into a tight ball inside my tiny white barrier. My hands clamped over my ears. From outside the salt circle, the horrors began. I could hear the wet, tearing sound of flesh, accompanied by a high-pitched, mocking snickering that echoed from every corner of the room. Cold, phantom fingers brushed against the hairs on the back of my neck, but they couldn't breach the salt. "Leo," a voice called out, mimicking my mother's perfect cadence. "Why did you let him in?" I kept my eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down my cheeks, repeating the time like a mantra. Just a few more minutes. Just have to make it to 3:33 a.m. A sudden, jarring vibration ripped through the floorboards. My phone, which had been put on silent in my back pocket, blared to life with a deafening, distorted alarm ringtone. I flinched, looking down at the glowing screen. 3:33 a.m. Instantly, the suffocating weight in the house evaporated. The freezing air dissolved, replaced by the normal stuffy warmth of my basement hallway. The smell of decay vanished. I stood up on weak, jelly-like legs and flipped the light switch on the wall. Bright, beautiful, fluorescent light flooded the corridor. The blood was gone. The beams were empty. I survived. I walked upstairs, poured the remaining salt down the drain, and threw the blood-stained paper into the trash. But as I sit here now, writing this out under the harsh glare of my living room lamps, I can't shake the final warning from the Midnight Man lore forum. Even when the game is over, he never truly leaves your house. Now every time I blink, the shadows in the corner of the room still look exactly like a tall, faceless man waiting for the lights to go out again. This is another game that I absolutely refuse to play, and I strongly advise to not play it. The reason being is that you should never call out to anything outside of your front door, because you will invite things in, whether you believe in it or not, you will. Which is why the name of this podcast is called Don't Whistle to the Wind, because something will answer back, and you will have the hardest time getting rid of it. Our fifth story is called The Elevator Game. I had spent weeks reading through posts on Reddit's r/NoSleep about South Korea's infamous elevator game. It is a ritual supposedly capable of taking a rider into a parallel dimension, and as an absolute arrogant skeptic, I chose a 10-story hotel in the downtown area that was barely operational, slowly going out of business essentially, and left promptly at 11 p.m. because I really wanted to prove everyone on the internet wrong. Upon arrival, I entered the hotel and quickly reread over the rules for the game. You enter the elevator alone. No outsider can get on with you, and you aren't supposed to get off on any of the floors. If you do exit, you must start over. Lastly, when you get to the 5th floor, if you encounter a mysterious woman, do not look at her and do not answer or interact with her in any way. The consequences of engaging with her are said to include the possibility of never returning to the real world. I walked to the nearest elevator, pressed the button for the 1st floor, waited for the doors to open, and stepped on. Now that I was on the elevator, the next step was the floor sequence. The sequence is to go to the 4th floor, down to the 2nd floor, up to the 6th floor, back down to the 2nd floor again, up to the 10th floor, down to the 5th floor, then to finally push the button to descend from the 5th floor to the 1st floor. If the elevator operates normally and takes you to the 1st floor, exit immediately and do not look back or talk to anyone. But if instead of taking you from the 5th floor to the 1st floor, if the elevator begins to go up, well, you're being allowed into another world, or so they say. You can't freak out, and instead must press the emergency button and wait for the fire department to arrive with help. And so I began the elevator game. Following all the sequences, I arrived at the 5th floor, but when the elevator chimed and the metal doors slid open, imagine my surprise of seeing a woman standing in the dimly lit hallway. She wore a trench coat, her long black hair veiling her face. My heart skipped a beat and my mind screamed the internet's most critical warning. No matter what happens, do not look at her, and do not speak to her. She is not human. She stepped into the cab, positioning herself directly behind my right shoulder. The air instantly turned freezing cold. I kept my eyes glued to the floor, my knuckles turning white as I pressed the button for the 1st floor, the final trigger of the ritual. However, instead of the elevator going down, the elevator shuddered and began to rise. 6, 7, 8. Cold tonight, isn't it? Her voice sounded completely wrong. It was a high mechanical imitation of human speech echoing directly inside my head, rather than through the air. I choked back a sob and stared at the elevator floor, refusing to answer. "Are you going to look at me?" she whispered, her breath sending an icy shiver down my spine. 9, 10. The elevator dinged. The doors opened to reveal an endless, pitch-black hallway. The hotel lights were gone. My phone screen flashed, completely losing its signal. I had made it to the other world. Terrified, I did exactly what the forums warned never to do. I panicked. I sprinted out of the elevator into the dark corridor, desperately trying to get away from her. I ran for what felt like miles, but the hallway simply looped back in on itself, and every door I tried was locked. Realizing my mistake, I sprinted back to the elevator. The doors were already beginning to slide shut. I lunged forward, throwing my arm past the sensors to force them open. The doors caught on my arm and retracted. I scrambled back inside the cab, hit the button for the 1st floor, and rapidly mashed the closed door button. But I wasn't alone. She was still standing in the back corner. She hadn't moved an inch. This time, she didn't ask a question. Her head snapped toward me, her hair parting to reveal a wide, jagged void where her mouth should be. A deafening shriek filled the enclosed space as the elevator violently plummeted downward. When the doors opened again, the warm, bright lights of the hotel lobby flooded the cab. The security guard looked up from his desk, completely oblivious to my terror. I stumbled out, tripping over my own feet as I ran all the way back to my apartment, not even bothering to call a lift. I threw my front door open, ran for my bedroom, launched myself into my bed and pulled the blankets over my head, thinking how lucky I was that I had escaped. I woke up the next morning and reached for my phone to delete my bookmarked paranormal forums. The screen wouldn't turn on. I walked over to my window to open the blinds, but when I looked outside, there were no cars. There were no people. The sky wasn't blue. It was a heavy, suffocating gray. Down on the street, dark, faceless, silhouettes glided slowly in perfect unison toward the center of the city. I ran to my front door and yanked it open, praying to see my apartment hallway. Instead, I stared directly into a rusty metallic elevator shaft. The cables hummed softly in the dark. I had messed up. I didn't beat the game. Now, I'm stuck in this other world with no way back. I know you're probably like, oh, here we go again. Another game she won't play. And I will tell you, you're 100% right. It has been speculated for years that there are other dimensions, parallel worlds, etc. And there is no way that I will be subjecting myself to any of that. But if you decide to do this, do it at your own risk. And don't say, I didn't warn you. Our sixth story is called One Man Hide and Seek. For Alex, the ritual was just an eerie way to spend a boring, stormy night. She was a skeptic from a sleepy suburb just outside of Chicago. Alex had never believed in anything paranormal, but had seen this game talked about extensively on the internet, and it intrigued her. She found the game's rules on Reddit and made sure to follow them to the letter. The rules apparently are very strict, and the penalty for breaking them is supposedly severe. First, you take a doll, remove its stuffing, and replace it with uncooked rice to nourish the spirit. You add a piece of your own fingernail to bind your essence and stitch the doll shut with red thread. Then, you submerge it in a bucket of salted water, name it, fill your own mouth with salt water, and turn off all the lights. Secondly, when the clock strikes 3 a.m., you stab the doll, declare, I found you, and run to your hiding spot. The minutes seemed to stretch into an agonizing silence. Then, she heard it, a dragging thud from the hallway. It wasn't the settling of the house or the noise of the storm outside. It was the sound of wet, stuffed fabric dragging across the hardwood. Thud-shh. A shadow, distorted and unnatural, crept near the closet door. The door handle rattled violently, as if an unseen hand was testing the lock. Alex held her breath, biting down hard to keep the salt water from leaving her mouth. Through the crack in the door, she saw the one-eyed baby doll. Its head twisted a full 180 degrees, its one plastic eye locking directly onto the closet slit. A cold, wet whisper slipped through the crack. Alex, I found you. Panicked by the terrifying proximity of the doll, Alex made a fatal mistake. She bolted from the closet, forgetting the final crucial rule of the game. You must finish the ritual by spitting out the salt water and pouring the rest over the doll to trap it. In her terror, she didn't even look back to see if the spirit had let go of the binding. She ran, screaming out the front door, leaving the bucket and the doll behind, and spent the rest of the night trembling in her car at a 24-hour gas station. By sunrise, the storm had passed. Convinced it was just an overactive imagination, she returned home. The house was eerily still. As she walked to the bathroom to dispose of the doll properly, the room was unnaturally silent, and the air grew freezing cold. The bucket was overturned on the linoleum, and the doll was gone. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her hand. The screen lit up with a single, unread message originating from her own home security system. A motion alert triggered in her bedroom. She opened the camera app to check the live feed. In the center of the frame, seated perfectly upright on her bed, was the rice stuffed doll. But this time, it was clutching the steak knife. The exact one she had used to stab the doll, that she had left sitting on the bathroom counter. A shadow moved in the corner of the frame. A dark, faceless entity stepped out from her closet. The camera glitched. In the very last frame before the feed permanently cut to black, the entity looked straight into the lens. A low, distorted voice echoed from her phone speaker. "The game never ends, Alex. This is another game to not take lightly, as again, you are inviting something in that you may not be able to get back out. So if you play this game, do so at your own risk." Our 7th and final story is called The Telephone Game. Don't ever play the telephone game alone at midnight. Legend says the static between worlds thins during the witching hour. You whisper a secret into a stringed cup, and another voice, not of this world, will whisper back. But if you listen closely or ask, "Who is on the line?" the spirit will demand to know your name. And if you answer, it will claim your voice forever. Eric learned this the hard way in his quiet, drafty apartment in Sacramento, California. Bored, he decided to play the telephone game. A game mentioned to him from one of his friends who had seen it being talked about on the R No Sleep Reddit forum. He tied a red thread between 2 paper cups at exactly 3 a.m. Pressing the cup to his ear, he whispered his own name, foolishly testing the urban legend. The room went deathly silent. Then a sharp, metallic thud emitted from the cup. It sounded like an antique rotary phone being violently dropped onto the hard floor. "I know who you are," a voice hissed from the cup. It sounded like a terrifying amalgamation of everyone he had ever known, speaking in reverse. Panic seizing him, Eric tried to pull the cup away, but it felt impossibly heavy, glued to his skin. The red thread began to vibrate and pulse in the darkness like a living vein. "Who are you?" the voice demanded, louder now, echoing inside his head. Frozen in terror, Eric dropped the cup, breaking the string. The voice vanished, but the silence that followed was suffocating. A subtle dread started to creep over Eric. He felt off, like something was severely wrong. He told himself that nothing was wrong, that it was just silly, that it had all been in his head, and began to take deep breaths, trying to calm himself down. However, when he went to laugh at himself for believing in such nonsense, nothing came out, not even a squeak. He panicked and began trying to scream, yell, anything. Nothing but silence came out. Not one single doctor could explain what had happened to his voice, and he had visited every specialist he could trying to get answers. But there was simply nothing anyone can do to help him, making him mute for the rest of his life. Eric should have heeded the warnings. And now, unfortunately, to this day, if he listens closely to the dead air in his silent apartment, he can hear his own stolen voice mocking him from the shadows. I have heard of this game, but I personally have never played it. I'm not saying I won't play it, but what I am saying is if you decide to play it, play at your own risk. That is all I have for you. Would you play any of these games? If you do, make sure you read all the rules and especially heed all the warnings. Until next time. You've been listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind. And as the tale ends, the candles have burned down to nothing, and the salt lines we drew have surely failed as the shadows have crept in. Don't let them catch you, and don't turn off the light.